This is a quick look at a custom HTML component that handles bookings. Uh, it has a couple of different data tables. So it's got a bookings data table, which has got the bookings for the facility, and it's got a facilities one. The facilities one also has an HTML field. Now you can embed this into your Figma design. I'm just going to do it in the back end for a development example, which matches what's in our documentation. So if we have a look at this facility data table, it has the following field. So it is the parent, so it has an embedded, it's obviously got a name and stuff, but the embedded bookings, that's the one-to-many relationship between the bookings. You might have some other information. It might have another micro or data table micro app that could handle things like blockout. So if you wanted to stop things being booked, but for this example, I didn't implement that. So the way that it works is I could come in on a specific date. I could say, let's say I want to book the 9 a.m. slot. Scroll down here, I can click the book button, and now that's grayed out. I could move to a different day. So let's have a look at that. Now all these slots, and I could, let's say, book 10 a.m. slot. I could also book the 10:30 a.m. slot. So this is, and again, if I move back to the different date, then we need to pull the data out of the system. Remember, each of these could have many bookings, so you need to dynamically pull the data out as you shift days. Now, what happened in the background over there is that those booking slots were actually added to this data table. So those are the ones that I just added in the last minute or so. So that's the core of how the application works. Let's have a look at what's actually happening behind the scenes. So let's go into really the core code is in the HTML field for the booking. And we're going to have a look at this. We're going to go down into the field over here. Oops, sorry, it's the embedded micro app, my bad. We're going to go into the booking one. We're just going to click edit. So there's some basic HTML over here. It's using some handlebars to get the availability slots. Again, this could be other queries and that, but in this example, it's pretty simple. You can go to date field, so you can select a date. When you change that date, you need to go and fetch the data from Buzzy for that. So you need to go and say, hey, go and give me all the bookings for that particular date. Because again, you might jump a year ahead or 6 months or next week or whatever it is, or go back in time, and you need to be able to pull that data because there could be literally thousands of bookings in that data table. So you don't want to fetch all that stuff up front. Then the way that this works is that there are these availability slots, so each one of them, and when you click it, then it goes to that select slot function, and we'll have a look at that. And then if you can't select a slot that's already booked. That's what so it goes through and it disables that field. But if you can select a slot, then it allows you to book the slot. So let's go through what's actually happening in this. So the first thing is, and you've got to remember that this is actually asynchronous content. The first time in the system, it will fetch the data that's been sent. So it's going to fetch the things like the resource JSON, the token also knows some information about the row that instantiated this call. Now this means that anytime data changes in the system, even if it was changed by a different user, it will get one of these messages. So if another user put a booking in, then it will tell the system it's changed, and then you can mark up the bookings. So let's have a look at that function. That function will get, it really is getting the core data, which are the children, out of the resource JSON. Then it will go through that and find the data table that is called bookings. So that's the first thing. So now we've got that bookings, data table, and then out of that we can get the data, and we're going to reassign it to and call it bookings data. So if there's bookings data, now we can do some stuff. So we can go through that. We're going to go through each of those bookings, and we're going to mark them up and fill those slots. So we call this disable slot, and that just disables that slot on in the UI. So that's pretty simple. So again, the first time in, or every time the data changes, we mark up those bookings. So if another user somewhere else or other users somewhere else in the system make the booking, it will get a message that the data has changed, and then then you can mark up those changes. So then let's have a look at, and this here is the disabled slot, and again it's just some basic stuff in there to just mark that HTML on the screen as disabled. And then let's have a look over here what happens when you book a slot. Now this has just got some sample code in here if you wanted to do an update, but if you remember, every time you book a slot, it inserts a row into the data table. So it's got the current row ID, it's going to need that, and then it will go and set the data for that row that you're going to, because you want to make an insert. So it puts it creates the date field, and it's got a start and an end time for that, which is going to be starting, is whatever the time that it was starting plus whatever add the duration in, and it's not going to check out that date. So there are different field types in Buzzy, date field types. So you can have full day with date time, or just a date, or just a start time, just an end time. So you can change that data. And then what it's going to do is it's going to call Buzzy and say insert a row in that data table. We're just hard coding the ID of the data table, and then we're passing it a data, and this could be multiple fields, but in this example we're just going to add the booking slot start time, which is the name of the field, and then we're going to put that booking date field, which we constructed over here, and so on. So all that's going to do is insert the data into it. Now what that will cause is, it will cause a data refresh, and we'll get one of these messages over here which will say, okay, I now need to mark up that date. So that's really how that works. So we inserting data. The other example, the other bit of code over here is some basic HTML stuff over here. But when you change the selected date, it's going to need to get the data to the client. So whether it's using a native app or using a browser, remember we could jump a year in advance, and we will not have that data there ready for this field to use. So you need to tell it to do it. So when you change the selected date, it's going to make another API call, which is going to say fetch embedded row data. So that's for the facility. So if we were in a tennis court 1, it's going to go fetch its data, or if we're in tennis court 2 or in the squash court, it'll fetch its data. You can put a limit on. I just said 100. It probably doesn't need to be that. Obviously the maximum number of bookings in a day. And then you're looking for data that is related to this resource. You're not searching the entire data table, but you want to search for data that is for that particular facility. And then we're going to pass it these view filters. So you can pass it. So I set the sort value as the date field, as the booking slot. So we're passing that, and we're saying give me data that starts at the start of the day and is less than, so it's greater than or equal to the starting second of the day. Again, this is an epoch date, and it's less than tomorrow's start date. So midnight, tomorrow's date, anything that's less than that. So this is going to send all the bookings for a specific day to the browser client or to the native client, and that will then kick off, you can then go and mark up the design. So that's basically it, how this field works. And it's a good example that's a bit more complex. So again, let's just to summarize it, let's just have a look at what we just talked about. So again, if I choose, let's say, a date on Friday, there are 2 bookings on that date. If I book that, I can't click that because we've disabled that in the HTML, but if I book that slot, it will now mark that slot up. If I go to this over here, there are no bookings on that date. I can now start booking here. I can add a booking. I could book over here, and so on. And again, if I come back to a particular date, it's going to give me that second. We just had 1 slot booked. If we go to the 3rd over here, we've got a whole ton of slot books. There's a few over here. So again, that's just an example of how that. Now you can use HTML to render this any which way you want, but it's a good example of where we are fetching data, we're either inserting or updating data, and that's it. So a bit more complex than the other API example and HTML example, but it's a good example to start with. Thanks.